So let's add a little podcast here from the book People of the Earth that we used in chapter 2. Adds a couple of additional points about the ideas of human diaspora, whether we came out of Africa or there could have been multi-regional origins. So these are the theories of the origins of modern humans, each of which interprets fossil evidence in very different ways. So it's the same evidence, but you can obviously have multiple interpretations, or you can call them hypotheses, because typically you collect data and you interpret to build a hypothesis, then you seek more data to test the hypothesis, and if you can test the hypothesis successfully with sufficient data, then you can make a theory out of it. So considering the very limited archaeological evidences and fossil evidences, obviously we are still running around with multiple hypotheses on these. So A is the multi-regional model, which argues for the evolution of Homo sapiens in many regions of the world, and the second one is the out of Africa model. So here it would interpret that African Homo erectus led to modern Africans, for example, and the European Homo erectus gave rise to Neanderthals and modern Europeans, with cold climate adjusted species in the middle. The Chinese erectus again would go to modern Asians, and Indonesian erectus would go to Nagandong, Gandong, I don't know, however you pronounce it, to modern Australians. So modern Australians, we have to be careful there. Of course, we know there are European implants there, but we are talking about the Aborigines. In the out of Africa model, you will go from African Homo erectus to modern Africans, but there was a branch that split off, and European Homo erectus would have come out of it, and Neanderthals and modern Europeans would come out of this branch coming from the African erectus, and the Chinese erectus would then basically disappear as well and lead to modern Asians. Of course, we have to also remember that there is now Neanderthal genes being carried by pretty much all populations with varying amounts, maybe modern Europeans carrying the most of the Neanderthal genes. And this came up during COVID. If you remember, there were papers written that people with a certain Neanderthal genetic traces had more chances of COVID infection and so on. So Indonesian erectus to Ngdong would disappear, go extinct, and the modern Australians would come out of modern Asians, and that would require maybe some confirmation from genetic analysis. So Alan Wilson and his research team used mitochondrial DNA. Remember, this is mostly transmitted from the mother, so it's a good technique to go back and find common lineages as opposed to haplogroups where you look at the total DNA. This is from 182 women around the world to develop this family tree of modern humans, obviously indicating out of Africa branching, and you can see various populations, or you can call them haplogroups, are shown here with percentage divergence in DNA sequence from Africa. So you have ancestors, okay, so coming here, the various numbers 10, 20, 30, 40 and so on to 180. So you can see that the deviations, typically the scale here is 0 to 0.6, and everything is either at most 0.6 or less in terms of divergence from Africa. So you can see here Africa, Asia is with this open triangle, Australia and New Guinea are with the filled triangles, and Europe is with this box here. So you can see how the genetic mix is determined by doing mitochondrial DNA analysis of 182 women, which seems to support the idea that the low level of divergence from the African ancestral origins would imply that out of Africa theory is the most likely one. Sorry. And of course we need climate to explain these diaspora out of Africa as well, which we have covered in other in podcasts from the other book. So we are just adding some additional points here. Adding additional points, is that good English? So this is the late Ice Age Southeast Asia, low sea levels exposed dry land off mainland Asia and between Australia and New Guinea during the last glaciation, creating Saul and Sunda. Hypothetical human migration routes and dates are shown. So the late Ice Age here is used in a different way. So it is basically talking about Pleistocene glaciation starting around 1.8 million years ago. And again, the thing to remember is that when glaciation happens and it's quite extensive, you are moving ocean water as snow and locking it up on land as glaciers, and this change can be hundreds of meters. So here we are looking at scale in space, and we are looking at marine shelves to 656 feet, so 200 meter contour, and existing landmass. So all these shelves would have been exposed, making migration very easy and possible. Well, maybe not easy, but quite possible. So you have to always explain how the current oceans were crossed in the past, and ice age and sea level drop would be an easy explanation. So here is 1.5 to 0.8 million years ago, and from here to New Guinea and Australia would be potentially around 40,000 year BP, so much more recent. And remember, by this time Neanderthals were still around, Floresiensis would have been there, Homo sapiens were of course running around. So those were the anatomically modern humans around. The summary of this chapter on human diaspora out of Africa in this book, People of the Earth, is two competing theories account for the appearance of anatomically modern humans. The multi-regional hypothesis for modern human origins has it that modern humans developed independently in Africa, Europe, and Asia, and that the biological diversity of contemporary humankind has deep roots in prehistory. Prehistory again is beyond about 5,000 years before present. The now favored out of Africa hypothesis argues that modern humans evolved in Africa, then spread into other parts of the world. The dating and nature of this spread is controversial, which is what we will see along the way. This point is illustrated by the 2017 work on Jebel Irhoud in Morocco, Northwest Africa, which has not only pushed back the date of first known Homo sapiens to a remarkable 350,000 to 280,000 years ago, as opposed to more recent than 300,000 years ago. So the previously oldest known evidence was roughly 200,000 years ago, but has also shown that our cradle was not restricted to East Africa as had previously been suggested. So genetic origin from East Africa migrating into Africa, or were there multi-regional origins in Africa itself? Okay. In terms of timings for the movement out, one school of thought believes there was a single out movement perhaps around 83,000 years ago, much more recently. A competing hypothesis argues for two exits, one before 80,000 years ago and the other one after about 70,000 years from Southwest Asia. The issue is unresolved, but it's certain that the diaspora of modern humans was a long, complex process involving small groups of people. So you can go and look at Axel Timmermann's modeling work, which combines these kind of archaeological genetic evidences with habitat models, which are kind of environmental determinism idea where you implicitly argue that environmental perturbations were critical for peopling of the earth. The date of the first settlement of China and East Africa by modern humans is unknown, but was probably at least as early as 70,000 years ago. During much of the last glaciation, New Guinea and Australia formed a single landmass called Sahul. Sahul was settled perhaps as early as 50,000 to 70,000 years ago, probably as a result of deliberate voyaging across those low sea level maps we saw here. Okay, but this crossing here is not as obvious as here because of the marine shelves, so some voyaging would have required here with explicit design or exploration into unknown territories. During much of the last glaciation, New Guinea and Australia formed a single landmass called Sahul, as I said. Diminutive hominins named Homo floresiensis and displaying a mixture of archaic and modern human characteristics had settled on Flores by 95,000 years ago and becoming extinct by 50,000 years ago. But as we will discuss in other podcasts from the other book, we will see that the verbal anecdotes from Indonesia and Malay regions seem to indicate that they were seen even during the end of the last glacial maximum around 12,000 to 10,000 years ago, or at least 12,000 years ago. So the hobbit Floresiensis was small with a lemon-sized brain, but hunted big animals like dragons and so on in Indonesian region and survived. So that's something that is still open as well. Their unique features may have developed due to isolation. There is also evidence for much earlier human settlement. People using open water craft had settled in the Solomon Islands of the southwestern Pacific by 30,000 years ago. First settlement of Australia may date at least 65,000 years ago. The controversy over the first settlement continues. Securely dated sites proliferate in Australia after 35,000 years ago. Late Ice Age hunters flourished in Tasmania by 31,000 years ago. So here late Ice Age is definitely talking about the last Ice Age, 135,000 years ago to about 10,000 years ago. The later archaeological record shows that the Australian life way changed a little over the millennia, except for some significant innovations in tool technology such as the boomerang, which still typically is typical of Australia. Modern humans flourished throughout sub-Saharan Africa by 50,000 years ago. As time went on, they turned their attention to smaller browsing animals, continually adapting to changing environmental conditions. Remember the cooling during the glaciation still going on during this time, the various marine isotope stages, which we will look at in chapter 5. A change well documented at Elands Bay in South Africa. They focused heavily on edible plant foods as well. So not necessarily domesticated plants, crops, grains, but just using foraging what is available. The densest populations concentrated in areas of abundant water and diverse animal and plant resources. It was from these diverse societies that modern-day African hunter-gatherer groups are descended. The later hunter-gatherers of southern Africa are well documented from rock paintings and archaeology. Controversy surrounds the interpretation of sand art from this region, which may be connected with rituals and altered states of consciousness. So some kind of shaman culture may have been around by then. In both Australia and sub-Saharan Africa, there is striking evidence for long-term cultural continuity, at least some of which dates back to the earliest appearance of anatomical modern humans in these regions. Okay, so keep this in the context of other podcasts from the main book we are using for the course, and just use the additional information we are getting here to supplement the other ideas from the other book. Of course, there's a lot of overlap, but it's always good to get multiple perspectives when possible. Okay?